Hi, I'm Mark McPherson. This video accompanies my videos in the series of videos in which I take a look at what I call the essential, fundamental, core, non-verbal or visual communication skills. This video is all about me answering the question, Mark, where did your ideas about what makes good non-verbal and visual communication come from? So, reasonable question, I thought I should answer it. So, that's what it's going to be about. I'll try and be brief, but perhaps there's a bit more to it than I first thought. So here goes. My first memory of learning something about non-verbal and visual communication was when I was very young, and I got a present, Christmas, birthday, I can't remember now, which I didn't like, and I guess my face showed it. My parents took me aside, and I think rightly so. They told me that, look, there are times when you get presents but you don't like them, but the reality is someone has gone out of their way, they put time and energy and love into it. Your job is to say thank you and look like you mean it. Now, whether you shake hands or give the person a kiss, whatever it happens to be, that was another issue, but that's what my parents taught me about, to look like it. Thank you, it's great, thank you, I appreciate it. Look like you actually mean it. So that's my first memory. Well, I'm sure we've all learnt lots and lots of things, even if we can't remember them, even if we weren't particularly conscious of them. We learnt lots of things from parents, guardians, people in authority, teachers and whatever. Let's skip to when I was a teenager and I had a job after school and on weekends. I was 16 or 17 or so. I was a telegram boy, which means I delivered telegrams. If you don't know what they are, I'm not going to go into it now, but that was my job. The postmaster, I think that's what they call the person, took me aside and said, Mark, this is how you deliver a good news telegram, this is how you deliver a bad news telegram. Basically, there were those two types, good news, bad news. And he said, you know, good news telegram, bad news telegram, do it more like this. Hello, I have a telegram here for Mr. Jones. So you don't necessarily want to hold it next to your chest. Keep it away from you, more professional, more business-like. You know, it didn't mean that good news. Hi, you know, someone's getting married. It wasn't about being silly. It was just like, I have a telegram here for Mr. Jones. I have a telegram here for Mr. Jones. So he gave me that some techniques or ideas about, you know, how we assign positive and negative emotions and feelings to things, and how we might want to be associated with good things, but not so associated with things which were not so good. Now, I don't know if I took any notice of that, probably not. But look, I do remember then being a tourist guide at Jenolan Caves in New South Wales in the 70s, and I think the person's name was Don. He was the senior guide, the head guide there, allocated Don to look after us new guides, younger ones, and what he did was he told us how to, you know, stand wherever you were, to give the rules and regulations and look a bit serious, keep your head still, don't frown, don't look mean, but be quite serious when you're telling them about the rules. But then he did tell us, look, once the rules have been given, you want these people to have a good time. You want them to go away having a good time and liking you and liking the experience. So then, you know, smile and say, if you've got your tickets ready, please follow me, whatever it happened to be. But it was you know, very different. He gave me those two ways or characters, if you like, from being, you know, serious, not moving around your shoulders, nice and still, making eye contact, of course, but just giving people the rules in a nice, steady and even voice, but then be a bit more of what I call bubbly when it's time to go in the cave. Good. I remember also in 1976, when I was doing my Diploma of Education to become a school teacher, I think his name was John Pearman. I think it's okay to use these names. He was great. And he did tell us about having a particular spot where you might want to give the rules to the class, another spot where you might want to make a joke, another spot where you want to explain something or whatever. He didn't say there were lots of spots, but I definitely think there were 3. And he said they were good. If you had a spot where you said, for example, where you wanted to tell the children that their volume of noise is too high, cut it down. Because he said what's great about that is that children aren't always listening, and as soon as you walk to that particular spot, if it's only used for that purpose, they'll very quickly learn. And he was right, because when I started to do that, use that technique, you'd find children doing things like, oh, we're in trouble, sort of stuff. So the whole point of that technique was to enhance the quality of communication. They paid attention, the person, the audience, the kids in this case, children, paid attention, and they understood what was coming. I remember the head teacher, I don't think that's what they were called way back in 1977, Bob Entwistle, told us how to, greet these kids. These kids are into football, these particular kids at this school. There's students, I should say, rather than kids. And he said, look, say, hi, do you see the game on the weekend? Oh, what about it? He said, that's fine. Build some rapport with them. Show that you care. Say hello. But he said, don't hesitate, if their behaviour is not satisfactory, to change your whole demeanour and talk to them the way you need to talk to them. So, there's all sorts of techniques that I learned then. Let's say in sometime in the 1980s, I did a course on neuro-linguistic programming, and I have a feeling it was John Grinder, sorry if I pronounced the name incorrectly, but I think that he was one of the inventors, if you like, people behind the neuro-linguistic programming techniques. I didn't agree with everything that I saw in the course. Some of the things I thought were, I don't think were actually right, but that doesn't matter. The course was great, really interesting, and he talked about anchoring, which we'll talk about in one of my other videos. And anchoring is what John Pearman talked about, with having set spots throughout in the classroom and set ways of looking and presenting yourself, holding yourself, set gestures to coordinate and anchor with particular sort of emotions and things that were going to happen. By the way, kindergarten teachers are fantastic at this. They have all sorts of symbols that they use as we generally do in society, but kindergarten teachers, primary school teachers make incredible use of this. And I think as we get older, in other workplaces, we tend to forget about them. Say when I worked in hospitals, I learned some techniques there, and one of those was when you were saying to people what the rules were, it was very handy, just for example, to say, sir, it's no smoking. And you'd point to a sign that said no smoking, and those are the days where you could still actually smoke on premises, and you'd say that. So I think what was useful about that was like the sign say, I'm a good person, but the sign, bad. Now, some people go too far, I think, and actually say, oh, see, the sign says no smoking. I'd let you smoke, though. I never said that. I think that's really poor, but no smoking. So you'd put the blame, if you like, onto the sign. I think that was really good, and directing people's attention to it with your hand and your eyes really made perfect sense. And I think that was a way of not just directing people to the sign, the information, but also holding their attention, but also saying, look, there you go. Because looking at people straight in the face can be quite threatening at times, and I think quite difficult for all of us. So if you're able to sometimes to say the sign, it helps. Where do I go? Oh, the police, I worked with police, not as a police officer, but I worked with police. I thought some of the police I met there were fantastic, the way in which they could deal with intoxicated people, not by looking them straight in the eyes, because that could be quite threatening, and to sometimes some people find it aggressive. But I saw some police work incredibly well with intoxicated people by giving them the information, showing them what had to be done, without actually confronting them with these eyes. I think that was really important. So eye contact is important, but not always necessary. That's what I learned from there. Let's skip ahead now. 2010, I think I did a course with a fellow called Michael Grinder. I apologise if I pronounced that incorrectly. I believe that's the brother of John Grinder, the neuro-linguistic programming person. And Michael did a course on non-verbal communication, a few days. I thought it was great. I learnt a lot from that. And what I particularly learnt from that, I think, was that, oh wow, way back in the late 1960s, that Postmaster with the telegram, about being good news telegram as opposed to not a good news telegram, was actually true. I should have paid more attention to it. So he put a lot of those things together, but thankfully I was able to look back at all of those experiences. One more, Postmasters. In the early 2000s I joined a community group called Postmasters. If you don't know what that is, please look it up on the internet as we Google things these days. Great experience. What I learnt there was about gestures. To stop this, to stop being so busy. Use gestures deliberately and be congruent when you're talking about big things or around things or how things join together. Use your gestures to help the audience get what you're talking about, focus attention, etc. And they also talked about the hand, the still hand. I always remember someone saying, look, there's a time to just simply say, listen, or so there I was, it was unbelievable. There's 5 things you need to know. I learned that in Toastmasters and I've never forgotten it, and I learned from so many different people, because one of the evaluation things, they do a lot of evaluation, Toastmasters was often great speech, moved your hands a little bit. Next time I want to see you not move your hands so much, but just keep your hands still. If you want to talk about the 2 points, do this, etc. I learned that in Toastmasters. I thought that was just terrific, really useful. Let me leave it there. I think that's enough. It's been quite a long video. If you've got this far, congratulations. I know many of you wouldn't have that. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, all the very best. Look after yourselves, look after your family and friends. Do hope to chat to you soon, and I hope that's explained to those people who have asked, where'd you learn this sort of stuff from? I'll leave that in your hands if you want to contact me, but all the very best. See you later.